Hey everybody, we are in day 32 in our Bible reading plan, and it is rolling along in Exodus 4 through 6 and Psalm 32. And today I want to start with a big idea, which is that just because you're doing exactly what God has called you to, does not mean it will be an easy road without roadblocks and rejection at every level. And Moses is quick to find that out. His first obstacle is his own self and his fears. We saw that in chapter 1 through 3. Even in chapter 4, we see him still arguing with God, saying, God, I can't do this job. I'm not strong enough. And God constantly takes his face and turns it up to God and says, you have to remember who I am. It is not your strength. It is not your ability. It is me. And so God mercifully and graciously reminds Moses of these things, and yet and warns him of the trouble that's to come and of the rejection of Pharaoh. And yet when he shows up, the people initially are excited, but not for long, because the pressure on them becomes even greater. The Egyptians put more pressure on them, and so they do what any of us humanly will do. They complained and they said, Moses, man, I don't know why you showed up. You're only bringing trouble upon us. We see that at the end of chapter 5. And Moses' response to that is that he goes to God and he says, why, God? Why did you get me in this mess? He says, why did you ever send me? For since I came to Pharaoh, he has done evil to this people, and you have not delivered your people. Of course, God is about to, and he's about to do it gloriously, but we don't see that yet. We see the trouble, and many of us quit right here. And God's response to Moses when the people oppose him, when Pharaoh attacks him, is that he says to him again in chapter 6, we see this so mightily. He says, I am the Lord. The same thing he said to Moses when he was faced with his own fears is what he tells to Moses now that he faces opposition and obstacles. He says, stop focusing on the people, stop focusing on the problem, turn your face and focus on me. I am the Lord. And there's so much in that. Remember, he is Yahweh. He is, God is said, I am. And so the essence wasn't just to say, oh, we have a God, but to really fix your eyes on the character of God, who he is, his promises, his word, his goodness. Think about all we've read in Genesis and in Matthew. The same God of the Old Testament is the God of the New Testament in Jesus. And that God is fighting for you today. And so the Lord speaks to Moses and Aaron. Listen, they're not completely convinced yet. They're still full of doubts. At the end of chapter 6, we see that Moses is still like, how is this going to work out? But God understands, and he works with Moses, and Moses is going to do something that he never thought possible, and not for his glory. But chapter 6 verse 1, he says, now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh. And the whole point was to give glory to God, who is, who was, who is to be. And so listen, if you are doing something for God, if God has asked you to step out in faith and you're facing obstacles, you're not alone. This is the way of the people of God. And if you're discouraged, you're not alone. But the reminder to us today is not to look at self, but to turn our eyes and to look at God, who he is. Meditate on who he is. Think back on the names of God, who we've learned him to be in his word. That's why we read the Bible, is to remember who God is and what he has promised us. I'm praying for you today, no matter what you're facing.